Okay, we're back. It's actually been a couple weeks since I've set these up to dry. I had them upside down in front of a fan for a couple days, and then I got pretty busy. I had to order some parts. I've been waiting for those to come in. They finally arrived, so there's been plenty of time for all of these to dry up. The water's drained out, so they're ready to be rebuilt. So let's rebuild some monitors. And actually, that brings up a good point. When I say rebuild monitors, what I'm referring to specifically is rebuilding these chassis, these circuit boards, because ultimately these are the heart of the monitor. This is really what controls what's happening and what you're seeing on the monitor. So there's two main parts. So you got your chassis and then you got the tube, the glass piece. And while it's true, tubes do fail. Some of the color guns fail. They get weak over a period of time. So say for instance, maybe your blue gun wears out over time and so the signal isn't as strong. But ultimately, these chassis are what cover all of the picture information. So the geometry, how that looks, are the colors washed out. So this is what we're going to be rebuilding. And so whenever you hear someone say, rebuild your monitor or recap your monitor, what they're referring to is the circuit board, the chassis for that monitor. And we will cover stuff with the tubes later, but for now, let's get to these guys. So, what is involved with rebuilding one of these chassis? And let me grab one of these kits here. So, there we go. So this is what's called a cap kit. And the reason why it's called a cap kit is it's a kit full of a bunch of capacitors, because these chassis have tons and tons of capacitors, and all of these capacitors have a different function. And of course, over the period of a few decades, 2-3 decades, 30 plus years, these capacitors start to lose their juice, so to speak. They dry up, they can leak, they can just, ultimately they just fail. And so replacing those makes a huge difference. And it kind of bulletproofs your monitor for, several years to come. And you can always tell when a monitor needs a cap kit just by looking at the picture on the screen. These capacitors control a lot. They control the geometry, they control the vibrance of the colors. They really control a lot of information, a lot of the picture quality. And so one thing that everyone usually recommends, and I do as well, is to start out with a cap kit if you're having any problems with your monitor. Now, these chassis, these monitors, I can tell already definitely need a new cap kit just by looking at the picture. In one of my previous videos, we went over that and the problems that they were showing. But on average, I actually will recap any monitor that I obtain. So any new monitor that I come in contact with, whether I pick up a game that's working, or the monitor is completely dead, or even if the monitor looks fine, I'll recap it, and it's just kind of a peace of mind. Even if it's looking decent, I like to recap it because it's kind of bulletproofing the monitor for a bunch of, for many years. And then that way I know too, I have like a baseline. I know, okay, well, I recapped this monitor in 2010, so I don't need to worry about anything failing in that monitor for, quite some time. Okay, so I've rambled enough. Let's discuss what else is involved. Now, so I'm going to start with just a cap kit, and I'll show you, how this works, the process of that. But aside from caps, a rebuild kit, which includes a cap kit, a lot of times includes a few other components that are prone to fail on these chassis. And really, there's not a ton to these. You got capacitors, resistors, transistors. But another component is the flyback, which is what sends most of the juice, or actually all of the juice, all the voltage to the tube. And these can fail. Now, with the 3 chassis here, I'm not going to replace those right away because they're working. And in my experience, especially with the Nintendo stuff, the Sanyo stuff, the flybacks don't fail real often. And they're not cheap either. I mean, yeah, they're 20 to 30 bucks a pop. You know, not breaking the bank. But, you know, if I can save that 20 to 30 bucks, you know, that's a win for me. So I'm not going to replace those right away, but they can fail. And you know, say for instance, like a Wells Gardner K7000. Now, I'll always replace one of those flybacks because there's a tendency for those to fail, especially after you recap the monitor for one reason or another. So anyways, a flyback is another component that's common to replace. And if you buy, like, they'll call these things, you know, like deluxe rebuild kits, say for instance from like Bob Roberts, and that'll include a cap kit, that'll include a flyback. Sometimes they'll include a HOT, which is the horizontal output transistor. You know, one of the major transistors on these chassis. Sometimes they'll include the horizontal width coil, which controls the horizontal width. And, you know, sometimes they'll include, like, say, a fuse. So there's a few other components, but a cap kit is generally a good place to start. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to recap all 3 of these chassis. Of course, I'm not going to shoot the whole thing. I'm not going to record the whole thing, but we'll go through a couple of them. And yeah, let's get to work. Okay, before I begin, let's talk about tools. Now, obviously, there's going to be some soldering involved here. Actually, a lot of soldering. So, need a soldering iron. This is by no means some a top of the line soldering iron, but it does the job well. You'll need a little clippers, like a wire clipper, because you'll have to cut the legs of the capacitors off. Solder, obviously. This is just a little tip tinner. It basically coats the tip of the soldering iron rather than using solder itself. This just makes it simpler. You can just sink the tip in here. And then this is a desoldering iron. Now, there's a few ways that you can desolder the old capacitors. Some use one of those solder suckers. It's a little pump that has a spring to it. There's also desoldering iron like this. I got this from Radio Shack for, like, I don't even think it was 15 bucks. And it just makes my life a lot easier because it's basically a soldering iron, but the tip has a hole in it. And so what you do is this heats up. You put this over the leg of the old component. It heats up and melts the solder, or liquefies it. And then there's a pump on the end here. And so you hold this in, and I'll show you. You put it over the leg, it heats up, and then you release it, and it sucks up the old solder. And it makes a world of a difference. I never had really good luck with those solder suckers. So this just makes my life a lot easier. And there are fancier tools than this out there. There are actually automated guns that have a vacuum built into them. And I would love to buy one of those someday, but right now I'll just deal with the desoldering iron. It does the job. So those are the essential tools you need for this. And then, of course, we've got our capacitors. And in this kit comes a sheet of paper. This is a cap kit from Bob Roberts. You can go to therealbobroberts.net. That's his website. And he's got tons of cap kits. But we've got our capacitors. And then this is actually a list of all the capacitors and all of their values. So it's got locations on here. Let's see here. See if we can see this. Hopefully you can see this. But it'll list a value of the capacitor and the locations. In this case, there's 3 of these, one microfarad 50 volt cap at location C504, and these locations are printed on the circuit board itself. So it's telling you where these caps are. So in this kit, there are 3 of these caps, and the old ones, the locations for these 3 caps is C504, 520, and C614. So basically, here's your checklist for the caps that you need to replace. It just makes everything simpler because now you have a checklist and you can kind of go one by one and just cross them off as you go. And then there's also some details down here. I won't read this whole thing, but it talks about, some of the values are a little bit different than the original capacitors, and that's okay, or in many cases it's better. There's always a few notes, and it always depends on the chassis. But this is really, really handy. I could go out and look up the values for each one of these capacitors and order them individually, but this is just so much easier. And these cap kits, most of the time they're under $10. So why not? It's kind of a no-brainer. So yeah, that's what's included with a cap kit. So let's get started. Okay, let's begin. The first thing I'm going to do is spread these capacitors out on the table here so that I can access them a bit easier. Some people like to lay them out across the list here. I usually just keep them separate, and I already counted these, so I know that they're all here. All right, let's see, which one should we start with? Actually, let me check my soldering iron here. See if this is ready. Oh yeah. So I'm going to use my tinning here and just tin the tip of my soldering iron. This will make it easier to solder. Okay. And I'm just gonna, the desoldering iron's nice and hot. All right, which cap should we start with? Let's do one that's fairly easy to access. So let's do, on the board here, there's C406, that's this capacitor right here. And 406 uses a 330 microfarad at 25 volts. So a lot of times you can pick them out. The sizes are usually similar, not always, but let's see here. And there should be 2 of these, so you can also look for 2 of them. Okay, here's one. Okay, well, the first thing is we got to get this old one off there. And, okay, it's right here. And I'll do a close-up after this so you can see this a little bit better. But the first thing I'm going to do is, since this doesn't look like it's ever been capped, I'm actually going to add a little bit of solder to this. I got too many cords here. So I actually didn't, on a side note, you can actually take this circuit board off of this metal frame. And I didn't do that. I didn't think it was really necessary. Yeah, it might be easier to handle if you took it off, but at the same time, because I've got this on here, I can actually stand it up like you see here. And that makes it easy for me to use 2 hands without having to hold it with one. Actually, let's turn it like that. Okay, so 406 is down here. There we go. And I'm just going to add a little solder, and this will actually, adding a little solder will make it a little bit easier, actually quite a bit easier, to desolder. Okay. There we go. Now I've got my desoldering iron here. And what I'm going to do is push the sucker in. Set it over it, let it melt, and suck it out. And do the other leg here. Oh, got a little bit extra on the board here. Let's get that off there. And again, I know this is probably difficult to see. I will do a close-up on the next one. Okay, so should be able to wiggle this guy out. Yep, there it goes. So there's the old cap. I'm just going to set that off to the side here. And now we've got our new cap. And it's going to be labeled here. You want to pay attention to the polarity because all these caps have a polarity. There's a positive and there's a negative. And again, I'm not trying to do like a soldering tutorial here. I'm by no means an expert, but all of these caps have them labeled as well. So one side's going to have a stripe, and that's going to be negative. It's also usually the shorter leg, and the other side will be positive. And on the board here, I can see that positive is on this side, and negative's on that side. So I'm going to thread it through on what they call the part side, the side that has all the components sticking out. This side is considered the solder side. Okay. And you can also read the polarity on the top of the board. And it's nice to verify that both the top and the bottom are the same. They show that the positive is up here and the negative's down there. Because sometimes boards manufacturers make mistakes. So you don't want to get this wrong because if you do, the cap can explode. Okay, so I've got it threaded through, and I'm just going to slightly bend these legs just enough that it holds the capacitor in place. If you do it too much, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You risk bridging a couple connections. But the other thing is that it's more difficult to desolder later on if you have to replace that cap or you make a mistake. So I just do it just a little bit here. Okay, so we can flip this back. And now we're ready to solder this on here. There's my solder. And again, I'm by no means a soldering expert. But the basic principle here is to hold the soldering iron against the component, the part, the leg, and I try to keep it against the leg and a little bit against the solder pad. You don't want to directly connect, or you don't want to directly make contact with the solder and the iron. You can, but it usually provides a very sloppy solder job. And once you get the hang of it, it's a lot easier to do it this way, the quote-unquote proper way. So I've got my solder iron against the leg and against the solder pad. And I'm just going to heat that up, let my solder, there it goes, start to melt. And it'll just kind of fill up, and then you just bring, it's kind of a two-step process. You heat up the component and the leg, and once the solder starts filling in and setting in on the solder pad, you can just bring the iron right up the leg of the component, and it'll make kind of a cone, and that's kind of the sign of a good solder job. You don't want a big blob because that's pretty weak. It can break. It doesn't make a very good connection, and you might run into problems later on. So, and I make plenty of mistakes. I have to desolder or resolder a lot of these components if I do make a mistake. So don't be afraid to redo your work. Okay. So we've got that capacitor done. Now, this brings up a good point. Everyone has a different method for doing this. I generally find myself taking a lot more time than other people. Some people can blast through these in 20, 30 minutes. But and I'm sure I could too if I was in a race, but why risk screwing something up? You've got the chassis out, you've got your monitor taken apart, it's out of the game. Do you really want to risk making a mistake and having to do this all over again? And for me, I'd rather put a little more time into it. So what I end up doing is I do all these one by one. I take out the capacitor, the old one, put the new one in, solder it. I leave the legs up. I'll clip all those at the end. And this is a nice way to re-verify which capacitors have been replaced already. You've got a checklist here, and then this kind of provides another one. But I like to do everything one by one. And yeah, it's more time consuming, but I kind of enjoy this. I like to solder, even if I'm not the greatest at it. And that little extra time is kind of a peace of mind for me. I know I did a good job. So anyways, let's move on. I will throw a more telephoto lens on, and hopefully that'll give you a better idea of what's going on. So let's move on to the next capacitor. Okay, hopefully you can see this a bit better. Now the next cap we're going to do is actually the same value as the last one, and it's located at C405. And I like to grab the capacitor on the part side. You can't see my hand, but it's on the underside of the chassis. And then just to give me a better idea of where the cap's located, it helps verify, the location. I can usually sync up my fingers. But C405 is right here. And so just like before, I'm going to grab my soldering iron first and add a little bit of solder to this. Okay. Now let's take my handy dandy El Cheapo Radio Shack desoldering iron here and hold in the sucker, the pump, and go right over this one. Suck out that solder. Same thing with the other leg. Voila. Now, should be able to get this guy out of here. A little bit of wiggling here. There we go. There's the old capacitor. We'll set that over there. And let me grab the replacement, which is another 330 microfarad 25 volt. And it looks like positive is up here, negative's down on this side. And I'm just gonna verify on the other side here. Yep, same thing. Again, negative is the shorter end. It's also got a stripe on it. Okay, got our legs here. Let's just bend them slightly so that it stays in. Let's see here, right there. I'm just looking to make sure that this is in frame so that you can see it. All right, now let's just add a little bit of solder. Again, you want to hold the iron onto the pad and the leg and heat that up, and then you can start adding solder. Starts filling up the pad, you just run right up the leg there and you get a nice little cone. Actually, I'm going to add a little bit more solder to this one. There we go. So you get kind of a little bit of a cone going up. Same thing with this one. Good. Okay. So we've got this guy done. I'm just going to mark it off my list here. That was C405 right here. Okay. So let's move on. Okay, well, we got through 2. We've got 24-ish left, I think. 24. I'm not going to make you sit through all those. I'll just speed this up. So I'm just going to blast through the rest of these caps, and we'll pick it up from there. Okay, we are done. I've got all of the caps replaced. The only thing left to do is cut the legs. Actually, let me backtrack. There are a couple caps. I believe it's these two right here. These are, I believe, the filter caps, and I do need to replace these, but I don't have those caps right now. The order I placed, they forgot to send the filter caps. So those are actually supposed to arrive tomorrow. So off camera, I'm going to replace these two. But all the other caps are replaced. The only thing left to do really is to clip all of these legs that are still sticking out. But before I do that, I want to do, let me just set this down here. Before I go through and snip all of these legs off, I want to reflow all of the solder that looks sketchy. And this is a term that a lot of people use, and basically what reflowing means is I'm going to go through with my soldering iron, and any area that looks a little sketchy, I'm just going to heat up that solder and in a sense, liquefy it or reflow it, and perhaps add a little bit of new solder to that. In some areas where it's really bad or looks terrible, a lot of times I'll just remove all of the solder and put new stuff on there. But for the most part, this goes pretty quick. I'm just going to go through, touch up all of the areas that tend to be problematic. And even if they don't look that bad, there are certain areas like, you can't tell, but over here, well, here, I'll flip this over. Let's see here. Hopefully you can see this. Put this away. So here's where the video Molex plugs in, the RGB, the ground, the sink. So these areas tend to be problematic. Weak solder joints tend to be a problem here. And other areas like these pots, these potentiometers, there's some here, there's some here. Those areas, regardless, I'm going to reflow. And there are some areas like, let's see, reflowing the brain fart here, horizontal width coil. And basically any area that has like a header or a connector. Here's where the audio plugs in. That's another good area to reflow. It's basically just preventative maintenance, and it takes just a couple minutes because you can just hammer out a bunch of these. Excuse me. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go through, reflow any of the problematic areas or areas that look problematic. And this sort of thing, it's not a very time-consuming task, but it really pays off, and it's a good habit to be in. I used to not reflow any of my chassis I would repair until the Marble Madness that I restored. I had a K7000 on there, and I had done a cap kit. Everything looked great, but for some reason, I could not dial in the contrast or the brightness, and I realized that the contrast pot, the knob that controls the contrast, wouldn't do anything. It had no effect whether I would turn it up or down. And these pots can go bad, but I thought while I was waiting for a replacement pot to show up, I just reflowed all of the solder there and everywhere else, and that ended up fixing it. Even though it didn't look that bad, it had a cold solder joint. And so that made all the difference in the world. And that takes 10 seconds. So it's a good habit to get into. And I'll do a couple here just to kind of give you an idea of how that, how it works. But it's really a simple process. Let's see here. I'll probably start, let me turn this over here. Hopefully, let's see, here's the connector, the video header. Let's see there. So all I'm going to do is take my soldering iron. Actually, let me Just clean up the tip here. And I'm just going to start down the line here and just heat up the solder and add a little bit to it just to make sure it's a good connection. There. So all of these have been reflowed. They look pretty good. And that's what I'm just going to do for the rest of these. You know, it's just basically going through here, and you know, this resistor here, the solder. A lot of these that came out of the factory, a lot of these chassis, if you look at them, like the solder is very, very minimal, and it doesn't take much. You know, it could be weather, could be moving the chassis, could be bumping it. It really doesn't take much for there to be a crack or a cold solder joint. And even though we tested this earlier and the monitor worked, this is just good preventative maintenance for the future. So yeah, you know, it's just heating up the solder and adding a little bit to it. There we go. Some of these are a little bit tricky, but you know, even ones like this here, I don't know how well you can see it, but I mean, there's like nothing there. And even though it may be making a connection, who knows if it gets bumped or you know, something, even just moving the game, you could end up with a cold solder joint, and then you'd have to take this whole thing apart again. Okay. Well, you get the idea. So I'm just going to go through, do that for all of the problematic areas, potential problematic areas, and then we'll come back and clip all these legs, and we should be done with this one. So, all right. Okay, so got the reflowing done, reflowed all of the potentially problematic areas, and now all that's left really is to clip all these legs off. And I like to go, you know, just above the solder. You want to leave a little bit of the leg exposed so that if you have to remove the component, it's fairly easy to do. So I'm just going to kind of go across the board here. And it's pretty straightforward, just snipping away And here's where having a decent wire cutter comes in handy. I use this thing all of the time. Actually, if I lost this, I don't know what I would do. Should probably buy a couple. Okay. Again, I'm just leaving a little bit of the leg exposed above where the solder is. Oops. Okay. So yeah, not too much to this. I mean, it's a little tedious. You know, it's basically a lot of rinse and repeat as far as the soldering goes. But I mean, as far as rebuilding these things go, as long as you take your time, it's fairly simple. You know, and I kind of enjoy this stuff. I like doing the electronic stuff. I like doing the soldering. Like I said, I'm no expert at it. I'm sure there's plenty of guys that are better than me that are right now watching this thinking, oh, you know, you're doing that all wrong. But this has worked pretty well for me. I've, you know, knock on wood, I really haven't had any major screw-ups. You know, I've certainly done a couple of these where I install it and there's still an issue and I realize that, oh, okay, there's a cold solder joint over here, but I don't think I've really ever made something worse. But there's a first for everything. Who knows? With my luck, this one's probably shot. I've heard lots of horror stories about guys putting caps in backwards, you know, messing up the polarity, and they fire it up and the cap explodes, which sounds pretty scary. I've heard they can cause a lot of damage and they make quite a loud pop. Which is probably a reason why I take extra amount of time to do these. Okay. Few more left here. I counted and I think there was 26 caps to this, so that's pretty mediocre, right in the middle. You know, if you do some of these chassis, I think the Geo7 doesn't have that many caps, but I could be wrong. But some of these, you know, only have maybe 15 caps that come in a kit. But then you look at some of the other chassis, and they go all the way up to upwards of like the 40s. You know, 40 some caps, that is a lot of caps. Oops, missed one over here. And one over here. Okay. All right. Let's see here. I think that, oops, this one's a little bit long. It shouldn't be that much of a problem because this frame sticks up high enough that it covers a lot of these, so you don't have to worry about there being a short or the leg making a contact, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And then there is one more on the neck board, there was one capacitor here that was replaced. So just flip this guy over here. I'm just going to double check my work here. Again, you can never check something too much. You can't overcheck. It's better to spend the time now while it's apart rather than installing everything, realizing you screwed your work up and having to take everything apart again. That looks pretty good. Okay. I'm happy with that. So now, that's one chassis. I've got two more to do. So I'm going to do those off camera. And then when I come back, we'll work on the tubes, or talk about the tubes and do a couple things with those. So making good progress, and I'll see you when I'm done with these. Okay, we are done. I've finished recapping all three of these chassis. All the capacitors have been replaced, so they're set to go. They're ready to be connected to the tubes and tested out. But before I do that, I kind of want to take advantage of the fact that I've got all of these separate, detached from the tubes, because it's a really good time to look at the tubes themselves. So that's what I want to do. I'm going to go grab the three tubes, and then we can kind of look at those, look at the life of them, and test them out. And then once we're done with that, then we can connect all the chassis back to the tubes and then test them out. So why don't I go grab the three tubes and we'll go from there. Okay, so here's my setup. I grabbed one of the sharp tubes, and then this is my tool that I'm going to use to test these. And there's a variety of names that these go by. Tube tester analyzer, tube restorer, and probably the most common name for this that you'll hear is called tube rejuvenator. It does all of those things. You can call it whatever you want, but basically what this tool does is it allows you to test the life of the tube and the strength of each one of the color guns, the red, the green, and the blue. And so it kind of gives you an idea of where the tube is sitting in terms of life and what it can reproduce and the colors. And a lot of people only really do something like this if there's a problem with the picture and they know it's not the chassis. I tend to use this thing probably more than most people. It's a cool tool. It's a lot of fun to use, but it's also a peace of mind for me. I mean, I already have the chassis detached from this tube, so it's a great time to just test the tube out and see how, see the health of the tube. Is it going to give me any problems? If it's got a weak blue gun, is it going to be hard to dial that color in? So I like to use this on almost every monitor. And believe me, if you're a serious collector or you get serious into this hobby, it's an invaluable tool. I use this thing all the time, and it'll come in handy. You'll use it. But if you only have like one or two games, yeah, probably not worth the investment. This is the Sencor CR70, and Sencor makes a whole line of these. This is not by no means the top end model. It's kind of right in the middle, and I think I got this on eBay for maybe $100. So it's not the most expensive tool out there, but you certainly don't need to invest in one if you've only got a couple games. But I highly recommend it if you're going to get serious into this hobby. Okay, so where do we start? The first thing we got to do is this book here. Hopefully you can see this. This whole entire book is basically models of tubes. It's a bunch of model numbers. And what you have to do is match up the model number of the tube that you want to restore with the number in the book. So this tube model number is 470 NVB22. And so what do? I go through my giant book here of tube models, and hopefully it's listed in here. This has so many that I've only had a problem finding maybe one tube in here. So, and I've actually already highlighted it down here. It is in here. So I'm just gonna lock that down. And this will tell me all of the proper settings I need to have my rejuvenator set to so that I can properly test the color guns. Now, most of these are very, very similar. I rarely have to change all of these. So the first thing I want to do before I even get into all of these knobs and gadgets and gizmos is I want to find out what socket I need to attach to this tube. And it says that right away. It says you need to use socket 13/UA. UA stands for Universal Adapter. And so back behind this manual is a bunch of different sockets, and they're all numbered, 2, 3. Most of these, let me pull them out here. Most of these have 2 on each of them. So number 3 is on this side, number 4 is on that side. And what I need is number 13, which is down here. It's this guy. And basically on the other side is just a plug. So I've got a cable here, and I basically just connect it to this socket. Oops. Like so. And then I need to attach this to the tube. Now, these are keyed, so you can only plug it in one way. It makes it real simple. And so I'm just going to match up that key with this plastic piece here. And you don't want to put a ton of force on here because these are pretty fragile. You can just kind of gently work it onto that socket. Until it's nice and snug, like so. Okay, so now we're ready to begin the actual testing process. So let me grab a different lens so that you can see what's going on here. I mean, you can tell, okay, there's nothing too exciting going on here. I've got this tester connected to my tube, so that's great. So now let's just focus on the rejuvenator / analyzer, whatever you want to call it. Let me grab a different lens and we'll come right back. Okay, so we've got a bunch of different knobs and settings and gizmos and buttons and all kinds of stuff. So where do we go from here? The first thing that we want to do is refer to this manual, this guide here of all the tube settings, and just kind of go down the line. So the first setting that we want to make sure that we have set is CRT type set to video. And that's this knob right here, and it's already on video. There's projection TV and scope. We want video. Then we set the bias to 68 volts. The bias is over here, and it's already on 68 volts. There's 52, 36, 20, and we want 68. I don't think I've ever had to switch that off of 68 volts. Then the next thing is the filament set, and that should be set to 6.3. We've got this knob here, and it is round numbers. I have it set on 6. And the reason for that is this knob here is kind of the fine tuner. This will give us that 0.3. And the only way to set that is we have to turn this on. Right now, everything's all turned off. So I want to make sure that the function is set to filament set, and it's not on any of these other settings. Everything basically on this side of this knob, everything in the yellow here, this is all testing, including the color tracking up here. This red side here is all for rejuvenating and restoring, and we'll talk about that in a second. So anyways, we got set to filament set. Let's turn this guy on. And on this is basically what we're going to be looking at the whole time, this meter, this needle. And I don't know how well you can see this, but we're looking for setting the filament voltage. So ignore the whole bad and good thing. We're looking for the voltage, and the numbers are at the top here. So it is basically right at 6.3. This filament set knob here will alter that slightly, as you can see there. But we want it right on this red mark here. Let me just move it out of the way. So you can see the 6 is here, and there's a little red line there, and that's basically 6.3. And so we want this right on there. Because if we don't have that on there, if this is off by a bit, you're not going to get very accurate readings. Sometimes, once in a while, you'll have to increase this a little bit to get, some people will say, oh, with that tube, you should instead of 6.3, you should have it at 7 or something like that. But I rarely alter any of the settings that it recommends. Okay, so we've got the filament set. The next thing that we want to do is move down this line here. And so for F1, it should be set to 4, and it is. Then we want F2 set to 5, and it is. And the rest of the settings are for each of the separate guns, and we don't need to worry about that right this second, because right now we're checking just kind of the overall life of the tube, not each individual color. But I like to have this set up just for the first gun, the red gun. So I'm just going to do that. So for red, we have to turn this to red. This is the gun select. So we got red, green, blue. So I set it to red. And for red, K should be set to 7. So I got that set to 7. And then G1 should be set to 6. And it is. And G2 should be set to 8. And it is. Okay, so we're all set. Let's start just kind of going down the line. So the first thing that we're going to check for are HK shorts. And these shorts are all shorts that you would see in the neck of the tube. So this is just going to check for those shorts now. And what we want is we want this needle to be in the good section. So let's start. We just move the knob to shorts. And yeah, there's no shorts, obviously. Everything's looking real good. So then let's move up to G1 shorts. Same thing. And now we're going to move to cutoff. And cutoff basically tells us, okay, we've got this set to red, but it basically tells us how much play we can have with adjusting the color of the color that we have set. So let's move to cutoff. And this is just like the filament voltage. We have a certain section here, and we want this needle to be right inside this little black box here. It says cutoff set. Hopefully you can see that. And so I'm just going to adjust. We have a knob here that says cutoff set, kind of like the filament set. So we can see if we can get it right in there. And we did. No problem. It's right in the cutoff set. And that basically means that, okay, we can definitely adjust the color, and we have a little bit of play, and it's in that sweet spot. So the cutoff settings should be able to be adjusted pretty easily. Okay, the next thing we're going to test is the emission. And this is kind of the emission of, just the whole tube. And we're sitting very well in the good. So all of these settings thus far look fantastic. This tube's going to be able to give us a good picture so far, and we have nothing to worry about. Now the next one we're going to do is called color tracking, and this is going to be specifically for the red gun. So since I have the red gun already configured here, all the settings are set up for the red gun, let's move it to color tracking. And yeah, red looks fantastic. So now I'm going to reset this all the way back to where I was for filament set. I don't have to really go through all of these all over again, but I like to anyways. It's just kind of a safety factor. Guys will tell me, oh, you don't need to check all of these again, but I like to anyways when I'm changing each of the color guns. So I'm going to move to green now. And for green, I should have K set to 9. So I'm going to do that. And it looks like G1 and G2 are the same as red, and so is blue. The G1 should be set to 6 for all three of these, and G2 should be set to 8 for all of these. So I don't need to adjust those at all. Okay, so I'm just going to move through this pretty quickly. Shorts are good, obviously. Let's move over to cutoff, and let's test the green cutoff. And we're looking great. It was pretty easy to get that in the margin. Now let's test the emission. Looks great. And color tracking. So green looks fantastic as well. So we're on a good streak here. Hopefully blue looks just as well. So I'm going to move this all the way back. Let's move to blue. And blue should be set to K at 3. G1, G2 are the same. Let's move through the shorts real quickly here. That's looking good. And cutoff. We have to back it up a little bit, and boom, right in the margin. Emission looks great, and color tracking. Yeah, so everything about this tube looks fantastic. Now, I mentioned that I would talk about this red section a little bit. Now, this is known as restoring and rejuvenating, and there's all these different levels. The first one's remove G1 short. Well, we don't have any shorts, so we don't need to do that. Then there's rejuve, auto restore, manual restore 1, manual restore 2. So let's say that my blue gun was really weak. I was way into the bad area, but all the others were okay. Well, I would set this up for blue, and then I would move this knob over, and I would probably start on the auto restore. And that's kind of the lightest restore function, because what each of these does is it attempts to shoot some heat, some voltage into the tube, and try to, in a sense, boost that gun and shoot some extra life and juice into it. And a lot of times it works great. It can fix a weak gun. It can give your tube new life. But at the same time, there is a cost to that. You can actually damage the tube and make it weaker than it was if you do this too much. And so I try to avoid that if I can. The only time I'll do that is if there is a weak gun and I've got nothing to lose. Typically, with settings like these, there's absolutely no reason to even try that, because everything's reading good and very good. So I'm not going to deal with that. But if, we've got 2 other tubes to test, and, who knows, there could be a weak gun and I'll want to try to rejuvenate it. So that's why people refer to these as a tube rejuvenator for those functions. I like to use it more just to test things out, but to each their own. Anyways, this tube looks great, so I'm just going to turn this off, disconnect it from the tube, and go grab the other sharp tube. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I've connected the other sharp tube, which is the same as the one we just did, so all the settings are the same. I've configured it for the red gun. I'm going to do everything basically the same as the previous tube. So everything's all configured for red. I'm going to turn this on, and let's set the filament voltage, and it needs to come up a little bit higher. That's pretty good. Okay, let's test for shorts. Nothing, that's good. G1 shorts look good. Let's do cutoff. Cutoff's actually already right in the margin. Don't need to touch that. Actually, I do need to touch it a little bit. I was sinking a little bit. So that's looking good. Emission. Emission looks fantastic. And let's do color tracking. And color tracking looks great. So let's bring this all the way back down to fill set. And let's go green. And green should be set to 9. All of these other settings are the same. So let's move this to green. And let's do shorts. Shorts look good. G1 shorts look good. Cutoff set, no problem. We're right in the margin. Emission of green looks great. And color tracking. Color tracking looks fantastic. Looking pretty good. All right, so let's move to B, and I believe B is 3 on the K setting. G1, G2 are the same. Let's move this over to the blue gun. There's no shorts. No G1 shorts. Cutoff is right in the margin. Emission level is good. And color tracking is good. Both of these tubes look fantastic. I'm really happy with the results. That means, provided that there's no problems with those chassis being rebuilt, we should be able to get a really nice picture on these guys. Okay, so I'm going to power this off, and then I'm going to go grab the Sanyo tube, which will probably have different settings. It's not going to be the same model. So I'm going to go grab that one, and I'll be right back. Okay, I've got the Sanyo tube here, and so I need to get all my settings for this one. And this one's actually going to use socket 3, it looks like. So let's pull this guy down here. Take socket 13 off here. And grab 3. So 3's on this side. Okay, so socket 3, I'm going to attach this to the tube. Obviously you can't see this, but same principle as before. Nothing too special. Okay, got that attached. Now, for the settings. Okay, we're set on video. 68 volts, same as before. 6.3 filament set. F1 should be at 9. And F2 should be at, F2 should be at 10. So F1's at 9, F2's at 10. And then for red gun, we should be at 8 on K. And 5 on G1. 7 on G2. Okay, that's all set. Let's turn this down to filament set. Okay, let's begin. Okay, my filament set is a bit high. Actually, there we go. Okay, we're dialed in to 6.3 like it lists. Now let's check for shorts. Shorts look good. G1 shorts look good. Cutoff test. No problem, right in the margin. Emission for red looks good. And let's check color tracking. Color tracking looks great. All right, back down to filament set. Let's go to the green gun. And for the green gun, we want K at 6. And then the other two should be the same. G1 at 5, G2 at 7. Okay, let's try shorts here. Look good. G1 shorts look good. Cutoff. No problem. Emission for green looks great. And color tracking looks good. All right, so just blue is left. Turn this to, let's see here. K should be at 11 for blue. And the other two should be the same, 5 and 7. So I'm going to move this to blue. Go through the shorts real quick here. Shorts look good. G1 shorts look good. Cutoff. Perfect. Emission for blue looks good. And color tracking. Whoa, color tracking is kind of weak. Huh. All right. Well, let's kind of go through this one more time. I just want to verify that I've got everything set right. So we're on blue. K is at 11. G1's at 5. G2's at 7. F1 is at 9. F2 is at 10. Okay. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly check the red and the green again, and then we'll come back to blue. So let's go back down here. And red should be at 8. Mission's good. Okay. Let's go green. We got go 6, 5, and 7. Okay. And blue is at 11. 5 and 7. Yep, we got some low color tracking. So the next process is going to be to do some rejuvenating. And let me, I just want to verify the lightest one, because you don't want to just leap in to any of these rejuvenations with full blast, because doing that can really cause a lot of harm. And if you can achieve the same results by not harming the tube as much, that's fantastic. You don't want to take any life off the tube that's unnecessary. So anyways, why don't we go ahead and do some rejuvenating. Okay, so now that we've determined that the blue gun is a little weak, it's time to try a rejuvenation, so to speak, on these. And the first thing that I'm going to do, all these settings are correct. We're on the blue gun. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this knob over to Auto Restore. This is the gentlest rejuvenation, so to speak. It cycles 3 times, providing some heat and voltage into the tube, into that color gun. And what it's doing when it's providing this heated voltage is basically trying to burn off any crud or anything that's on that cathode that would cause it to be weaker than normal. And a lot of times this is very effective, but I always like to start on the weakest of the restorations, because you don't want to do any more than is necessary, because this is going to shorten the life of the tube. And it's a subtractive process, meaning it's not really adding anything to it, rather it's taken away in order to get a cleaner signal. So I've got it on Auto Restore. The next process is there's this red button up here for Rejuve or Restore. And what you do is you press and you hold this, and you'll watch the needle when it'll go way up when it's adding current, and it'll drop back down. Then I'll add some more a second time, then I'll drop down, and it'll do that 3 times. And once it's done with the 3rd time, then the restoration or the rejuvenation is complete. So let's go ahead and let's press and hold this red button. Okay, that's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. Okay, done with that. Now, what I want to do is move this, move this back down to fill set. And I just want to re-verify all my settings. Okay, we got blue configured at K at 11, G1 at 5, G2 at 7. And let's move up. Okay, emission looks good. Now let's check color tracking. And color tracking looks great. That is awesome. And how would I have known this if I hadn't tested the tube out? I could have been adjusting the monitor for, hours and hours trying to get that blue cranked up when the whole time it was just the tube. So here's a great example of why having one of these tube rejuvenators around is extremely handy. Now, this isn't always the case. You're not always going to get results like this, but generally you do get a little bit of change for the better. And although I use this mostly for testing purposes, it's a very nice peace of mind. And it's always nice to know that there's something, you have something you can do to at least try to fix an issue with the tube. Because, you could have the best chassis there is that's been rebuilt, recapped, and it's working 110%. But if that tube has a weak gun, you're never going to be able to reproduce that color effectively. So again, this is a kind of an extreme case of getting fantastic results off of one rejuve, but in the end, it's just a really handy tool to have around. So anyways, let's move on to the next part.